Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. I'm Deb Kier-Velati, and our guest today is Jason Adams. He is the president of NI2. Welcome, Jason.
How is everyone today? Hope you're having a great week.
Yes, nice to have you. This is a very important topic. We're going to talk about the essential link between rapid decision-making and improved hospital RCM. And in our conversations, Jason and I were talking about how this isn't perhaps something that is talked about a lot. And yet, if analysis paralysis takes over an organization instead of nimble, rapid action in the C-suite, then there can be costly ramifications. And one of them is certainly the revenue cycle. So, Jason, let's first discuss what you see as you work. You're out there working with clients and potential clients. How can you quantify for us how rampant is delayed decision-making in the C-suite?
Well, I think it is prevalent in 95% of organizations across the country today. And I wouldn't say it's due to a lack of authority or ability or burnout. It's really about lack of nimbleness and leadership. Being exposed to so many leaders from every region across the country gives me a little bit of an advantage to truly catalog a wide array of approaches, styles, and barriers to success. And really, I would say a key theme I've seen over recent years, and more recently in the last 12 months, is hesitation. It's hesitation by the leaders out of fear they're going to make a mistake, out of fear that they'll do something that will jeopardize their job, their employment, their position. A big fear around the attempt to lead by consensus. Yes, consensus and buy-in is important, but oftentimes leaders have a brain block around needing too much consensus. In my view, many healthcare leaders have this perception that they must include everyone in a decision in order to obtain that buy-in and verbal buy-in. And really, will verbal buy-in make that project or initiative any more successful? From my lens, this couldn't be further from the truth or reality, because the top 5% of organizations I work with have a very lean senior team that meets regularly and makes rapid decisions. They're effective communicators, set clear expectations, and when someone on the team is not meeting expectations, they clearly articulate to that team member where they're falling short. And it's about mapping out that clear plan for corrective action and constructive feedback, and having those defined performance measures as the norm as opposed to taboo.
It brings to mind a change agent in healthcare who wrote a book called Patients Come Second and basically turned it upside down. But he was exactly what you were just describing. He's a nimble thinker who was trying to tell executives that in the healthcare field that if you put your people first, patients will automatically come first. But that's kind of, that would be considered putting the cart before the horse, but it isn't really. So with what you're talking about, it would make sense, and yet there must be a lot of distractions, or is it distractions that's causing leaders to have delayed decision-making?
I think they're self-induced distractions. I think it's really, as I articulated before, it's out of fear of making a mistake, fear of their employment, fear of not gaining consensus. So if they lead by committee and lead by consensus, they can deflect from any problem or speed bump in the road that may come from an initiative. And really, it all stems from lack of communication. So if you lack defined goals, if you lack defined performance measures, then you lack direction within the organization and structure. Everything needs to be measured within the revenue cycle, and I would say with patient safety, with physical plant improvements, with capital improvements, and within the revenue cycle space. So without a yardstick and without knowing the rules to engage and play by, how do individuals know how they're performing? In healthcare, it's often absent in the majority of organizations that they have crystal clear measures of success and what's important that aligns to their core values and the mission of taking care of the patient. But unfortunately, my view is 95% of organizations fail at these very fundamental processes. Additionally, oftentimes there's this conundrum of unassigned authority, what I have coined out there, that it's not necessarily the CEO, CFO, CNO, COO, it's IT. Because every initiative today in our every day of escalation of the requirements of technology, the dependence upon the electronic health record, independent of what system you're on, it's all controlled by IT, the wizard behind the curtain. And oftentimes organizations require the blessing of IT before any initiative moves forward. And that stalls projects because they lack bandwidth. Rather, flip it around as you articulated, put it on its head and say, what's the opportunity cost that we're losing by trying to sequence this project in the IT calendar? The IT calendar is never going away and it's never going to be down to zero. It's always going to be a full legal pad of issues that need to be addressed by IT. Rather, look at a cost benefit analysis. Do the organizations need to hire additional support for special projects? Do they need to contract out to an IT agency on a project by project basis? Look at the return on investment and what are you losing by not acting today on that initiative? What I would say, that's the key questions organizations should be asking, as opposed to when can we sequence it in? It should be, how much are we losing every day by not making a decision and acting today?
And in healthcare, it could be described as a circle, because there may be some things that don't on the surface appear to be directly related to revenue, and yet everything is related to revenue, because whether it's technology or making a decision on an initiative or getting hung up in IT, if that impacts the ability to carry out patient care, then that impacts the ability to get revenue in the door. So it's all
Absolutely.
connected, right?
Correct.
It's all connected. And, do you think that, everybody's so tired of talking about the pandemic, but the pandemic exists, it will continue to exist. It changed everything. We're not ever going back to normal, so to speak. But tell me what you saw. What did it do in this area that we're talking about? How did it push things and change them or make them worse?
I think that there's definitely been change. I think there was a flavor of this fire of the day pre-pandemic, and the pandemic or the current way of work has exasperated the fires of the day, because the workforce has changed and it's evolved over the past 2 years like it has never evolved before. And organizations that were dead set against staff working from home, dead set against remote connectivity, now have the majority of their staff working from home and connecting virtually as we're connecting today. From our experience with working with clients today across the country, healthcare organizations have swung in the opposite direction. The opposite direction, where there's more people working from home now, and there's limited face-to-face interaction other than video meetings like this. So there's pros and cons to every change and every evolution. What separates and distinguishes the top 5% and how they manage and set expectation for their performance, it's about clearly identifying core work hours, core start times, core end times, core day-to-day interactions with performance expectations. If organizations now mostly virtual, cameras should be on during meetings, not off during meetings. People need to be present in the moment to reduce the multitasking of the hundreds of emails now, hundreds of Teams messages now, hundreds of every medium as to how people communicate, even via text and everything else, that we need to go back to setting the clear expectations and call out when people are trying to escape those performance expectations. Staff and leaders can be just as productive from home if leadership sets the right expectations. So the fires of the day are self-induced due to a lack of expectation setting and poor leadership execution, from my view.
I think that's right. And I think that healthcare falls victim to itself and that it has always moved at a snail's pace. And COVID kind of whacked it on the side of the head and said, you have got to move faster or you're not going to survive. And I think hospitals did during those initial days, right? When the pandemic hit and there wasn't enough room and everything was on overflow and there weren't enough staff. And when all of those things hit, I saw it from inside, the pace increased, but now I think it's just, the pendulum swings back. And so I think that's where those fires come from. Can you, as you work with organizations, is there any way to quantify what this is costing?
Well, if I were to frame it visually, I would frame the cost due to lack of execution and the ability to make decisions due to the role of large committees. Projects and initiatives often die with committees, or at the very least get stalled and bogged down with politics and bureaucracy. Most, not all, but the majority of the healthcare systems feel the need to be 100% inclusive so that there is extensive input prior to any change or new initiative. On the surface, that's great. And on the surface, it's needed for collaboration and buy-in. However, the time frame to make a decision needs to be reduced, and it is reduced in that top 5% of organizations that NI2 works with. The workflow steps for organizations to make decisions through the many layers, it needs to be changed. So what we've observed in those top performing organizations is a drastically different way when it comes to the flow of decision making. Yes, there's always committees. However, the committees are smaller in size and very nimble. For most decisions in the revenue cycle, once patient safety and compliance is cleared in a very rapid fashion, the committee evaluates initiatives on the merit of the financial impact to the organization, and then a decision is made. The financial impact is the net impact to the bottom line and cash flow. So for example, take an opportunity that's presented to a leader. That leader needs to get the topic on the agenda of some committee. That's month one. Then the committee will always have questions. I view that as a delay tactic, and there's no decision made until the questions are answered. Then the questions get answered, but month two, the committee, there's no room on the agenda, so the topic is moved to month three. The questions are reviewed during the third month, but then there's inevitably someone in the committee that desires to do more research, more analysis, more validation. And now we're in month four. And then it's back to the committee's agenda during month five. In month five, they finally approve the initiative in the perfect world, and then attempt to assign a project leader, but then it goes to IT for resource support and bandwidth, and can they do this? However, IT's bandwidth is 2 months out on their project list. Before you know it, you're at month 7 before you're even starting the initiative. So an initiative that hypothetically would deliver 1.2 million in improvement to the organization, you've lost 7 months. So that was $700,000 to the bottom line, lost opportunity, never to be recaptured again. And there's hundreds of these examples and hundreds of these initiatives that go before the C-suite on a weekly basis in every healthcare organization across the country.
I'm laughing because it's true. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because this should be a book, because that is exactly how it goes with numerous different variations, right? And the delays that you just outlined, that's in the best scenario.
Correct.
That can be multiplied, right?
Most times it takes a year to get a new initiative across the goal line and get consensus from everyone within the organization. That's why I started by saying a lot of the things die when they go to committees, or at least get bogged down, delayed, pushed to the next fiscal year, so on and so forth.
At least. So let's talk about, we've talked about just, the top of the iceberg here about what the problem is, but let's start talking about what you see as the solutions, because if we want C-suite leaders to be solely dedicated to rapid cycle process and nimble decision making, how do they create, first of all, let's say they want to do that. Let's just make that assumption. how do they go then to start creating that nimble structure so that they can start implementing the effective decision making that they want to see?
First step from our view is changing the philosophy around committees. Committees need to be smaller, and committees should only be meeting when decisions need to be made. The work needs to be done prior to the topic getting on the agenda, but when a topic gets on the agenda, there not only needs to be the topic and the peripheral materials provided in advance of the meeting or the committee meeting, but also that a decision needs to be made, and what decision the committee is asking the committee members to come prepared to the meeting to make a decision, yes or no, and why. So really the first step is setting out the meeting agenda, defining the topic, calling out the decisions that need to be made, and having a singular leader responsible to champion those efforts. Don't just have vague agenda items, name it and name the decision that needs to be made so everyone in attendance knows that a decision is going to occur. Define the gross benefit. What is the value creation to the organization? Identify any additional costs or spend associated with the new initiative, whether it's an additional FTE, whether it's a software, whether it's a subcontractor, whether it's a vendor. Identify those and itemize them. And then that can clearly tell you what your projected net benefit is to the organization. And then how long will it take to implement? What's the ramp up period? And how will you measure success and at what frequency? The focus should be on the defined actions to get to a decision. If the initiative is compliant, has zero impact on patient safety, the top 5% of organizations limit those decisions to occur in 30 days or less. Being nimble and very purposeful is a critical success factor for those top performing organizations that we work with.
Let me jump off to the side a little bit here, because that's a very interesting point. So doesn't that also then feed the willingness of people to give up their time to be on a committee when it's constructive and productive and it actually serves a purpose instead of it just soaking up another hour or two?
Correct. You have 100% participation 100% of the time because they're only meeting when decisions need to be made. If there's nothing on the agenda, they don't meet. There's no need to meet. If no decisions are need to be made, whatever information share can be done via email. Get the time back.
Miracle.
Get the time back to the leaders so those clinical leaders can be at the bedside with the nurses, with the physicians. Get those non-clinical departments back in their departments to work with the team members, the staff that are on the front lines every single day, as opposed to having middle management, upper management, or senior management in a room, not solving anything and walking out with no decisions being made.
Mm-hmm. Happens time and again. So what about in the case of, you know, the corporate structure in healthcare is getting wider and wider and wider, with more and more hospitals under them that are being purchased. Hospital systems are expanding. Certainly here in the Northeast, we see that all the time as the conglomerates get larger and larger. So the C-suite at a hospital, although they've got the fingers on the pulse of that hospital, they may be beholden to the corporate structure. Where does the rubber hit the road in that type of a scenario? And how do they, is it possible even for them to adopt some nimble decision-making in that situation?
I believe it is, because and I too witnesses it with a few of our clients that are part of larger systems, and their local leadership controls that process through clear communication. It all goes back to the local leadership. Even in the largest of healthcare organizations that we work with, we have clients that have clear channels of communication with their corporate counterparts. Most senior executives understand the value of rapid cycle decision-making. However, they often they're removed from the day-to-day operations and forget the value of doing this well. Local leadership, more so than corporate leadership, need to be skilled at effective vertical communication. Package the ask, check all the boxes, Develop a clear communication channel to make the decision easy. Patient safety, check. Corporate compliance, check. Net benefit is X. And then the leader who will facilitate the initiative, come prepared, have a plan, map out the execution cycle, and have a key owner who sees the initiative through from start to finish. Then measure the success and report on the success in terms of value created. We forget to celebrate our wins with the corporate senior leadership structure, but force them to take the time to listen and review the success. If this happens a couple of times, corporate is going to be more engaged at the local level and fully endorsing rapid cycle decision making at the local level.
Just an aside, Jason and I are going to continue talking, but those who are in attendance here, if you have questions, please just write them into the chat, and we'd love to answer your questions as we go along. I am really curious, what is the reaction when you have these conversations inside? I'd love to be a fly on the wall.
I'd say it's refreshing and mixed, where not every leader prescribes to it because it is a process of action and they can no longer hide in the tall grass. I know I'm probably being a little unfiltered, maybe with some of the attendees today, but I'm confident that anyone that's listening is in agreement that yes, that occurs in our organization. Yes, I wish we could do something different. That's the key piece. It's a matter of taking the risk to have the taboo conversation, calling it out in a professional way, and having the professionals get together to have a consensus to do something different. So we've helped many organizations morph into this structure, and it has proven to be very successful.
And do they then have the evidence that they need to go to the corporate level to say, this is what it means in terms of revenue for our organization?
Absolutely, without question, because everything's measured, everything's documented, and it's clearly defined and calculated.
Interesting. The only time I ever saw this working in a hospital was for capital needs, where there was a committee that was made up of people from all different departments, and they actually honed that process down to a fine working machine. And so every single month when corporate said, okay, what's your top 3 asks? We had them. And because we had them, we were first in line, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where we saw the benefit of that kind of thinking and decision making. So there's a couple of questions here. Do you see this problem outside of the C-suite? We've been talking about the C-suite and that level within the organization. So even if there's direction that's crystal clear from the top, does it get bogged down in middle management? And then what happens?
Yes, the issue with middle management is different. They're fighting fires every day and have no time to even eat lunch. They need support. It's senior leadership's responsibility to ensure that middle management has the tools and equipment to do their job. This is the core basic need as described from Gallup. Do you have the materials and equipment to do your job every single day? In 95% of organizations, unfortunately, they're simply not staffed properly to take on new projects outside of day-to-day operations, especially in the revenue cycle, because we did such a great job of trimming FTEs and measuring all of those metrics that we've done ourselves a disservice within healthcare. And really, the net benefit to organizations and the key component around that is a better understanding of what they need to spend, and they need to spend to make money. I mean, I'll spend $200,000 all day long on an initiative to drive $1 million in net benefit and have net benefit of $800,000. 95% of organizations focus on a budget number. And if it wasn't prepared in the budget, and reality shows you the day the budget's published from healthcare organizations is out of date anyways, but if it isn't in a budget number, they can't spend it. That's archaic thinking, because if it's going to drive net value to the organization, why would you not spend the $100,000 that is not in your budget to drive $1 million? If something's going to impact patient safety, whether it's in the budget or not, it's going to be spent because it's all about taking care of patients. It's all about driving better outcomes. It's all about reducing readmission rates. It's all about infection control, all of those things. Change the focus and think in the same themes with revenue cycle. Just because it's not in the budget doesn't mean you shouldn't spend the money. Determine a value creation associated with it, and then focus on that net benefit to the organization. Get out of the boxed thinking and be more nimble in that process.
I think that brings us back full circle to the inability to make decisions, because I think that people are at all levels. Let's say frontline, they're experiencing the short staffing issues. They're fried. Then middle management, they can't help their employees because they can't get staff. Then the C-suite, well, they don't want to pay for travelers anymore because it's $1 million a week. So it all gets frozen. And then you, as the change agent, you have to come in and poke a needle in that balloon and teach them where to begin to rethink.
Correct. All the time.
Wow. That's really fascinating. That's really fascinating. Is this for middle management, there are always those who are extremely talented. They know exactly what they're doing. They have a big view horizontally of their area of the organization. Is this an issue of the adage of speaking truth to power, which sometimes does not go well for the truth sayer in the organization?
I think so, but it all starts and ends with the C-suite. If the C-suite doesn't see the light, it will always be dark. If healthcare desires to change, healthcare needs to change the foundation of how we make decisions. Everyone should not be involved in every decision. And true leaders are okay with that approach because the top 5% of organizations act in that nimble way. They speak the truth each day. They're effective communicators, and they're okay with it. Consensus is important. Buy-in is critical. Inclusion is valuable. Equally as important is the nimbleness of your structure to identify an opportunity. Check the patient safety box, check the corporate compliance box, clearly map out the model for net benefit, and then execute. Don't admire the issue. Don't be bogged down with a committee, and don't feel lost because it wasn't in your budget. Treat revenue cycle opportunities the same way you would treat a sentinel event. When there's a sentinel event in a hospital, everyone comes together almost immediately following the conclusion, the resolution of the sentinel event. That's taken care of, the patient's cared for, it's done, we moved on, we corrected the issue. There's a debrief almost the next day. Or if there's a disaster within the organization with an influx of patients to the ED, there's always a debrief, either immediately following or the very next day. Treat the revenue cycle initiatives just like a sentinel event. Bring the people together, get the right people in the room for a short period of time, analyze the issue, document the issue, measure the net benefit, and move on. Don't wait 7 months for analysis paralysis to move and then potentially act and then be bogged down again by getting into the work queue of IT that this isn't a bash of IT, this is the reality. They have a very trim team and their list is this long and they don't have the ability to be the master of all.
Treating RCM like a sentinel event is really the headline. Yeah, it's also the title of your next book. I'm just suggesting. So, do you have a specific example that people can hang their hats on and take with them about where you saw a lack of decision-making change? You saw that change and what it meant to the organization. I guess I'm asking you for a mini case study.
Absolutely. I would say last year, about 18 months ago, working with an organization to assist the CEO and CFO with changing the way they approach revenue cycle decision making. They were bogged down with their inability to execute and make decisions We presented and worked with them a rapid cycle process and how they could improve that. And they had, by our calculation, lost about 5.5 million of opportunity due to poor decision making and had a very trim operating margin. A year after changing their decision making process, going to this rapid cycle, no decision exceeding the 30-day time period, they now, a year later, had their best operating performance ever that just closed December 31st of 2022. So it has made a marked decision. Their employee engagement scores improved over the same period of time, and they didn't have any impact to patient safety. It remained high within the organization.
Great story. So before we close, for the people who are listening today, if they're thinking, you know, this is this is exactly what my organization needs, what's their first step when they leave here today and they go back to their office, or they're in their office, but what's their first step?
Their first step is getting those within the organization to entertain a discussion. Entertain a discussion about thinking how they can be more nimble, how they can trim their committee structure, and how they can be purposeful in all of their meetings. Everyone knows this needs to happen. Everyone knows this is a prolific problem within healthcare. Someone needs to have the courage to state it. Someone needs to have the courage to bring it forward and get people to see the value associated with this difference.
Powerful information. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but this is essential, I think, and certainly for healthcare, if they're going to figure out how to move forward, I think this has to be a core part of their behavior and their change. So thank you so very much. I appreciate your time, Jason.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time, and wish everyone a great balance of your week.
You bet. Thank you so much.
Thank you.